Hey gang, I am Joe Edelman and welcome to the Last Frame Live, the longest running weekly photography live stream on YouTube. Look, if you're watching live, you probably know the drill already. Please leave me a note in the chat. Let me know who you are and where you're watching from. And if you're watching the replay, no worries. You can still do the same. Drop a comment below the video so that I know you were here. Already, who do we got tonight? We got Joe in Vista, California, Jay in Colorado. I got Lynn in New York, Calvin up in Maine. Picture of Fix just got here from Germany. Let's see, we got Greg from Washington. And who else? We got Scott in Arizona, Canadian Source Rex, Mike up in Canada, Phillips here from tomorrow in Australia, Eric down in Texas. Awesome, gang. So let's dive in because I have got a lot on the agenda tonight, but you know that my priority is always the Q&A. So please, if you're here, how can I help you? Type your questions. We will still do a Q&A even with all this stuff that we've got to talk about tonight. So let's dive right into news because there's a whole bunch of stuff and there's even stuff that's breaking just as I was about to go on the air. So the one thing, obviously, I was going to tell you about the Sony cameras. I'll mention that not in a nerdy way. I think it's an interesting piece of conversation that we want to have. But what I did come across today is DxO. DxO, who are the current owners, I say current because this piece of software has moved around a little bit, of the Nik Collection. They released Nik Collection 6.3. And this, for those of you that don't know what Nik is, it was originally, well, not originally, it's been owned by Google. It was originally owned by a company called Nik. It's a photo editing suite of plugins that work with Photoshop and Lightroom Classic and really allow you to take those pieces of software to a whole new level. But DxO has taken the software and they've gone back and kind of rebuilt it from the ground up, give it more stability, more speed, better user experience, which from everything I can see so far is the case. I've only had about an hour to kind of play around in it and see what's there. But according to the company, since they acquired the Nik Collection from Google, DxO has pretty much taken on the task of reauthoring all the code so that it's up to date and matches the latest technology. So with this update, the plugin suite is fully compatible with Windows, Mac OS, and all the Apple silicone devices, which are awesome. And again, these work inside harmoniously, as they like to say, with Adobe Photoshop, Photoshop Elements, Lightroom Classic. And by the way, they also work with, of course, DxO's own software, PhotoLab, and Affinity Photo. And the report is everything is faster, much more reliable than before. Full disclosure, number one, this is not sponsored, I wasn't paid, but also I only use one of the Nik plugins, but I use it religiously, and that is Silver Effects for my black and white processing. I don't use it for 100% of my black and white images, but anytime I really want to go for that real film feel that I miss from back in the film days. Not that I want to go back and shoot film, but if I'm really after that look, then I'm going into Nik's Silver Effects. It's a great piece of software and it's very effective. Okay? So last week, I told you that Sony had an announcement planned for this week, and indeed for all of you Sony faithful, Sony announced 2 new camera bodies and a new G Master lens. So we'll start with, let's start with the C here. Let me get that up on the screen and we'll tell you about that one. So there's the C. Many consider the original compact Sony AC that came out in 2020 as kind of a smaller, lighter Sony a7 III. So the new a7C II, which you see on the screen right now, is a similar kind of alternative to the Sony a7 IV, which is actually the camera body that I'm using. Real quick, just to go through some of the specs, the AC2 or A7C2, excuse me, uses the same 33 megapixel sensor as the A7 IV. It's great quality for stills and video. Autofocus capabilities, outstanding. Just to go through some of the other stuff, it's got the same Bion's XR processor, the dedicated AI processing engine. Autofocus tracking with subject recognition, 759 autofocus points with 94% coverage of the frame, up to 10 frames per second with autofocus, in-body image stabilization rated up to 7 stops, and the list goes on. A whole bunch of great video features as well. No mechanical first curtain shutter, not a big deal, but this camera will be available in September. Body only price in the US, $2,199. There's a kit that will come with the FE 28-60, 4 to 5.6. That's going to sell for $24.99. And then there's also a grip extension that you can get for this. The other camera that Sony dropped, it's a new, also, relatively compact. It's got no pentaprism on the top. It's fairly small, but this is a high resolution, full frame, mirrorless camera. So it's bringing a lot of the features from the A7R5 into a smaller form factor, and indeed at the same time a lower price bracket. It's kind of hard to call these cameras a lower price bracket, but if you compare, it's a lower price bracket. 61 megapixel sensor, lossless raw images, 8 frames per second continuous shooting, 7 frames per second in the e-shutter mode. And again, a whole bunch of other features, including some nice video features. This does pixel shift high resolution. It's got a single UHS-2 SD card slot. Also will drop in September. Recommended price tag, $2,999. And don't forget the 95 cents. The camera comes also with a screw-in grip extender. Interesting little piece. I don't have a picture of it here. I've seen some images of it. It doesn't appear to have any functionality. I think it literally just gives you a little bit more to hold on to. And so before I talk to you about my conspiracy theory, I'll also mention Sony's got a new lens they dropped. It's the FE 16-35 f2.8 GM2. So this is an update lens to the third of Sony's trio of the 2.8 zooms. Basically, they've made it 10% smaller, 20% lighter, and they are claiming, and I haven't had a chance to read any of the reviews from the guys over at Petapixel or any of that, but they're saying in addition to the 10% smaller, 20% lighter, it is promising improved corner-to-corner sharpness, better reduction on chromatic aberrations, and also a little bit closer focusing distance down to 22 centimeters. This one's going to be available also September, $2,299. So if you got a lot of extra money floating around, go for it, right? But here's the thing. There's really nothing in these cameras, to be clear, that's going to improve your photography, right? So hopefully none of you are sitting there with gas like, oh my God, this is the camera I've been waiting for. Because, not really. But there's something I want you to pay attention to. And there are people out there that will hear me say this and say, oh, he's full of crap. And I'm not proposing to have any inside information. Let's be very clear, right? This is simply based on some really easy observations that you can make as well. And I really think we should all be paying attention to this and to the possibilities that it brings. So these two cameras are full frame cameras that both of them are very high resolution and very full featured. They're not completely full featured as are the other cameras. And which, by the way, can we just point out, sorry, put a pin in that. Sony now has 18 or 19 or 20 camera bodies. Why? Sony users, and I'm one of them, that's why I'm speaking out. It's time to let this company know enough is enough, right? They could start combining features, make their cameras even more valuable and also easier to figure out what you need, instead of creating a situation where most photographers are likely going to need one or two different Sony bodies to do all the kinds of photography they want to do, right? So that's my little rant. Back to these new cameras, okay? Extrapolate out as you look at these two cameras and you look at the size. Keeping in mind, I've already shown you, if you follow my show, that the Sony a7 IVs and the Sony a7R IV-A, which I use, are only fractionally bigger than the Olympus OMD EM1 Mark III and the new OM1 camera, the OM system OM1, okay? Fractionally bigger. So when you look at these cameras and we kind of extrapolate out 5, 10 years down the road, right? Which, that'll probably be at least 15 to 20 more Sony camera releases between now and then. But full frame cameras are getting smaller and they're getting lighter without sacrificing quality, without sacrificing sensor size. And each new one of these compact cameras is coming out with an even better, more full-featured feature set. So where does this go? 10 to 15 years, as technology advances and processors get smaller, we are going to see smaller and lighter full-frame, full-featured cameras, which, if you remember back to the Tony Northrup days of the world is ending, Olympus is dying, they're going to go out of business, that crap. What were all the people yelling about? Why can't Olympus just make a full-frame camera like everybody else? I still think, at least for the time being, Olympus made the right decision. But as this technology advances and they're able to get more and more features into these smaller cameras, it's going to make Micro Four Thirds format a tougher and tougher sell. Just is. Based on the current tech, today, right? August 2023, the only real advantage that the smaller format has, as you extrapolate, smaller, lighter lenses. That's the real advantage. It's not a camera body size. Now, again, I'm making the comparison with Sony right now because we know Canon camera is huge, right? That kind of stuff. Nikon, actually the Nikons are a lot smaller too, but I don't have a Nikon to compare, right? So I can tell you though, with the Sonys, yeah, camera body wise, we're not gaining anything with the Olympus in terms of size and weight. But indeed, the lenses on the full frame cameras, much bigger, much heavier. But look at the lenses that are coming out. Just like the kit lens that Sony's just announced, which isn't really a kit lens, but it's a 2.8 zoom, okay? Sorry, I shouldn't call it a kit lens. Smaller, lighter, we're getting there. So let's be clear. I'm not doing the Tony Northrup thing. I'm not predicting the end of Micro Four Thirds, but I am saying, hey, pay attention, right? There's gonna be some cool stuff coming down the road. And especially if you are looking at, making a system change, and if you're looking at Micro Four Thirds as the smaller, lighter, alternative, I don't know how much longer it's going to be smaller and lighter. And in all fairness, too, one of the other big feature pieces for Micro Four Thirds, right now, it's smaller, lighter, and less expensive. But again, as technology advances, I'm not sure how much more they're going to be able to pack into a Micro Four Thirds camera that is going to create a value proposition against what's going to be coming down the pike with full frame. So again, this is not skies falling. If you're an Olympus user, you've got a great camera system. Relax. Notice I said 5 to 10 years. Could be more. I have no inside information. But pay attention, right? The writing's kind of on the wall here that we're making some really big strides in size and weight, right? But at the same time, gang, we need to start holding Sony accountable. They don't mean so many doggone cameras. They just don't. Look, companies got to make money. I'm all for that. But come on, right? There's no need for that many cameras. So, all right, quick education update here. Where is my button? I don't have the right button. Oh my gosh. Okay, so let's just go back to that one. In fact, I'll switch over to the browser. A couple things that I want to talk to you about too in particular. Next Friday, and it is September 8th. I need to fix that number that you just saw on the front page. It said the 12th. It's the 8th. Next Friday, 1 o'clock. So, in fact, I'm going to share this link. This link is in the description below the video. I am going to share it here in the chat. I want all of you to go register for this right now. All you got to do is put in your name and email address. It is free. So it's a 1-hour webinar that I'm doing with my buddy Vinelli at Skylum and also another incredibly talented creative digital artist named Carly Sullen. And we are going to be doing some creative editing using Luminar Neo. Just like when you hear me talk about Photoshop and all that kind of stuff, the basics you can do with any program, but we are going to play around with some of the really cool creative stuff that is in Neo, which is something that I've been doing a lot more lately. The thing that's neat about Neo is and by the way, I'm not getting paid. I'm not even getting paid to do that webinar. I'm not sponsored by Neo. I'm doing this as a favor for my buddy Vanelli. Okay. I have the software. I've been using it for a while. It has not replaced Photoshop for me. I don't expect it to replace Photoshop real soon. But you know what? They are certainly headed in the right direction. And a big part of that is the way they're using AI tools, because they've got some excellent AI retouching tools and some other creative tools. So it's a chance for you to kind of get your head wrapped around what Neo can really do, what potential is there, because here's the way that I look at all of these softwares that are available today, especially when we factor AI into the conversation. You don't have to go out and start using AI. So for those of you that are just at the point where you're kind of feeling comfortable in your processing and you're like, crap, now there's something new that I got to learn. No, you don't have to learn anything now. But look, if you're smart, you're at least going to pay attention to it and stay aware of it. There are incredible creative opportunities that are being created with the use of AI. And for all the crap we hear about AI, and yes, there's a lot of crap, and a lot of it deservedly so, at least remember, AI is not what's causing the problem. It's people causing the problem. Now, if you're a Terminator fan, if the AI becomes sentient, then that's a different discussion. But for now, the AI is not the problem. So yeah, there's going to be people that are going to misuse it. We're going to have to work through that as a society. We'll get there. Already, if you pay attention, Google's, looking at some new technology they're going to use. There's a bunch of people that are going to be on it. I guarantee you, companies like Apple are on top of that kind of stuff. Adobe, don't worry, it's coming. But in the meantime, this AI is opening up tremendous creative possibilities. So next Friday, September 8th, it's free. The reason I said you should go and register right now, I realize, especially if you're in the US, if you're in the East Coast like I am, you probably work Friday afternoon at 1 o'clock. You can't sit down and watch a 1-hour webinar. It is going to be recorded. If you register, you will get a watch link as the program ends, and you'll be able to watch the replay. Okay, so the other one that I want to let you know about, let me go ahead and switch that screen over here, is actually on September 12th. And this one is a program that I'm doing creative portraits with colored gels. This is actually one of my fun ones. This is kind of all about how you make color really work. So for those of you that haven't had a chance to play with color gels yet and maybe find color and color gels a little bit intimidating, or for those of you who want to be able to up your game with the colored gels, this is the thing for you, because as I often do, we're going to start out with some of the science and the color theory, and we're going to develop an understanding of how color impacts emotion. I'm going to go through my whole process of how I choose my colors. I'm going to talk to you about color palettes, all that kind of stuff. This is a 2-hour program. It's Tuesday, September 12th, 6 to 8 p.m. in the evening, Eastern time. And again, also, it is $10 to attend. This one's not a freebie. It's only $10, okay? If you can't make the session, you will have 72 hours after the session to be able to watch it. It also includes a digital download. Basically, it's a PDF with all kinds of resources about color, color theory, color and emotion, all that kind of stuff. So you'll have that to keep afterwards, okay? All right, so just a reminder before we move on, all of you are part of a growing global community of photographers in over 100 countries who tune in to watch The Last Frame every week. It would help a lot more people find out about The Last Frame if you could do me a solid, hit that thumbs up down there below the video. It's real simple. It's an algorithm thing. It's not for my ego, I swear, okay? The more thumbs up, the more YouTube recommends the show to other photographers. All right, so let's go ahead and let's take a look at this week's shoot breakdown, okay? Oh, you know what? I skipped a piece of news, but we'll come back to it at the end. So the shot that I have for you this week, it's actually a really simple portrait, but I used a modifier that I have just recently gotten my hands on. and I'm really falling in love with this one. So let me give you, and so this is basically, this version is just 2 lights and a reflector. And I'm going to show you the breakdown in a second, but just to go through the gear really quick, I shot this with my Sony a7R4A, the Tamron 70-180 f2.8 lens. It was at 121 millimeter focal length, so a little bit long, which I've been doing a lot of that lately. Not a specific reason other than I've just been working up around anywhere from 110 to 135-ish. That's been kind of my sweet spot of late. I'm liking the perspective it's giving me on the face. It's a nice working distance because I tend to shoot things very tight anyway, so it's working out well for me. As I always do, or almost always do in the studio, f8 was my aperture, 1/250th of a second, because that is the fastest shutter speed that my camera syncs at for flash, and the ISO was 100. So the material that's wrapped around my model's neck, in fact, let me grab that link. There is a link to it in the description below the video, but I wanted to show you guys what it is, and hopefully I don't get in trouble with the YouTube gods here because this is a maternity picture that's going to come up. But it comes from oh my goodness, lots of pop-ups. It comes from So Trendy. They call it a capulette. Unfortunately, I could not find the red one on their website anymore. But I wanted to see how the piece was intended to be used and how I used it. I will also tell you this. It's crazy expensive if you buy So Trendies. The folks at So Trendy are awesome. Their stuff's really cool. I'm going to tell you honestly, you could find similar materials on Amazon or, maybe at a fabric store, or even just to get some light tool at a fabric store and go to a craft store and get the little gems and glue them on the material. A lot of options to not have to spend that kind of money if you want to do something like that. And I want you to watch the way I have it wrapped around her, because I'm going to show you 2 versions before we finish. So the setup, let's just hit the lighting here really quick. The setup is fairly simple. Key light on camera left, slightly above my subject, and a red gel below the subject on the back, a reflector on the right. Now, the modifier that I used for this, in fact, let me switch back to my browser because unfortunately the software doesn't have that particular modifier in it. So I want to make sure that I am showing you the right modifier here. And let me just figure out where it went to. Sorry. There it is. Okay, so this is the modifier that I'm using. It's the Rogue umbrella travel kit. I am using the larger of the 2 umbrellas that comes in it, which is a 38-inch white umbrella. And I am using it this way. Whoops, let's take that off there. With the sock over the front of it. By the way, what's cool about this particular kit, this has become like my favorite travel kit at this point. This is how big the whole kit is. That's it. Right? Super, super small. Inside this bag are both of those umbrellas, the 38-inch one and the second one is what, a 32-inch one, and then also the sock for the 38-inch, which is honestly just amazing. So I encourage you to take a look at that if you're looking for modifiers. But I will say that I've been finding myself more and more lately just sticking with the umbrellas. Super easy, super sweet light, super soft. It's great for the kind of work I do. So one of the things I would love for you guys to weigh in, I need your help. Before I show you the second version of this shot, this is one of those shots because it has a lot of red in it. So I knew this as I was shooting it. I knew that I love the color. I like the color red, obviously, right? But I also know that when you get those various shades of red, from the really dark red to the slightly lighter red to the almost pastel reds in between, that there's great opportunity for black and white, especially since my model's got these gorgeous blue eyes, nice light skin. So I'm curious your thoughts. First you saw the color version, here's the black and white version. I'm not gonna lie, I'm torn. So I will be posting these later on Facebook, but in the meantime, feel free to use the chat. Let me know, which do you prefer? Do you prefer the black and white or do you prefer the color? And I also told you to make sure that you keep an eye on the way that I have the material wrapped. So basically this thing is a drape, this caplet. It's a drape with kind of a hole in the middle. And you saw for the maternity shots, they drape it over the model's head and then down her body. So I didn't want to use it as a maternity piece. I was using it as this wrap. The other version that I did is a slightly lower angle. And you can see I changed the way the material's wrapped and also added a rim light on camera right. So for the rim, that's simply a matter, if we switch that over here to my other display, of adding in this light that you see here on camera right. And then up above me, you can see how it adds the extra color in. Okay? All right, and by the way, the link to that caplet, if you're interested in being able to get a closer look at it, it is in the description below the video. Okay? All right, so actually, I do want to go back really quick. I skipped a news thing that I saw right before I came online. So let me find that because I've been a little bit tough on this company in the last couple of years. And I at least want to be fair to let people know that they've done this and this is out there. The folks at Paul C. Buff have finally released a new light. And it's been a while, right? Unfortunately, the founder of the company, Paul C. Buff, passed away a bunch of years back. But and he was the guy that really created all of their tech. So they've got this new line called Celestial. You know, interesting shape, a little bit awkward. That doesn't matter, right? I'm just saying it looks a little awkward, right? It's a 500 watt second strobe. They are saying that it puts out more light than the Godox AD600, which is a 600 watt second strobe, which is very possible, by the way. That's, if you understand how watt seconds work, it doesn't automatically mean that a 600 watt second strobe is brighter than a 500 watt second strobe. I know that just makes things that much harder, right? But that's true. It doesn't mean it's automatically brighter. So they claim that it's brighter than the AD600 and brighter than the Elan Chrome 5. And it's got a self-contained battery, which you can swap the batteries out. You can buy additional batteries for $119. And this thing is going to sell for a not horrible price. Where was it? We're going to come back and talk about those gels that you just saw in a second. Let me get down here to the price because I literally found this right before we came online. Price is, where is it? $649 is the price. So if you're a Buff fan, there you go. They're finally kind of catching up with the industry in terms of what's out there and available for lights with, you know, battery operated location lighting. It's not super big. Their stuff comes with a 2-year factory warranty, 30-day absolute satisfaction guarantee. And if you've never shopped Paul C. Buff products before, even though I was very disappointed that the company wasn't keeping up after Mr. Buff passed away, I will tell you right now, their customer service, unmatched in the industry. They're in Nashville, Tennessee. Good old-fashioned Southern hospitality when it comes to how they work in terms of their customer service. And even like if you're ever in Nashville, look them up and give them a call. They'll probably say, why don't you stop by and we'll give you a tour. They're like really, really awesome there. Okay. So, and here I'll drop a link for that just in case you may have worked with Buff or have some Buff stuff or even considering a lighting change. Is there anything about this light that is going to make your photography better than what you're using now? If you weren't already in the market for a new lighting system, no, there's nothing about this that's going to make your lighting better. And keep in mind that you're also dealing with a situation where it's kind of a one-off, right? It doesn't have a whole system built around it like a Godox, or as much as I don't like the price of Profoto or Westcott or any of those where you've got this full system, they're not there yet. So it's basically, it's a 500 watt second strobe, period. Okay. All right. So the DIY tip that I have for you tonight, let's go ahead and bring that up. Tonight's DIY is something that I would encourage most photographers outside of maybe landscape and nature photographers. But if you shoot portraits, especially if you shoot models or portraits and you want to get creative, even if you do any kind of product photography or commercial advertising photography, I would encourage you to have a bottle in here. Let me get it nice and close to the camera. We're going to go down there. There it is. Glycerin. Pure glycerin. You can get this stuff for like $7 or $8. Obviously, you can see I got this bottle at a CVS. There is a link in the description below the video. You can get it online at Amazon, really, really cheap. It's really important that you get the pure glycerin, the vegetable oil stuff, right? You don't want anything else mixed in it. And then if you get it at like a drugstore, CVS, sometimes you have to ask at the prescription counter for it. They have it behind the counter, but it's something they can sell over the counter. It's just you frequently won't find it on the shelf. But you also want to catch yourself while you're doing that. Get yourself a little eyedropper, right? The kind where you squeeze it and the drops come out. So why might you want this? Well, let me show you. Shot like this as an example. All those drops are water mixed with glycerin. Now, in this case, we put some water in a spray bottle, a squeeze spray bottle, and then put the glycerin in. The glycerin, they 2 to 3 parts water is what you dilute this with, right? And then you spray it on the face. Why would you do that? You do that so that the water doesn't run right off and dry. The drops hit and they stay. So you get that wet look and you have time to be able to shoot it. This stuff will not hurt anyone. You don't want to spray it into somebody's eyes. And, they shouldn't really be licking it or eating it, but it's not going to hurt, right? Have them close their eyes when you spray it. And don't spray it so heavy in the eyes, it's just going to keep running into their eyes, but it's not going to do damage. That's the good part. Some other examples of shots where I've used it. In this case, it's just a little bit on the sides of her face and then, of course, her shoulders, her arms. But this is also what we used back in the day, and they still do. So I shouldn't say back in the day, but I don't shoot food now, but I did way back when. This was a shot that I did. This was part of a national ad campaign that was done in 1987. Okay, this is, 1986. This was for a chicken company that processes chicken, right? But all the little water drops that you see on the sandwich are placed there by hand. Every single one of them, okay? Another example, but not as many, as you look at the water drops that are on these chunks of vegetables, they are all placed, the tomatoes, all placed by hand. So it's one of those things. I probably use this stuff once every 2 years, right? It lasts forever. It's not going to go bad. You're not going to have to throw it out. I've had this bottle for probably 4 or 5 years now, okay? And you can't go wrong. So it's a little extra added touch. And for all the AI that we have and for all the cool filters and tools that we have in Photoshop and Luminar and all those other pieces of software, we don't have a good substitute for putting random water drops. I mean, there are ways you can do it in Photoshop, but it's quite a bit of work, right? So this is a way that you can do it and have a lot more control. And if you put it on and you don't like the way it's sitting or that, you can wipe it off, put more back on. So just keep a little spray bottle. And by the way, the spray bottles, don't spend like good money in the spray bottles. Go to a dollar store and you'll find different sizes of them and get a bunch. Like I have a whole shelf in my studio that's like dedicated to literally spray bottles that I use for all. In fact, next week's DIY involves a spray bottle, and so you'll see another use for the spray bottles with that. Okay. All right. So let me go ahead and hit Q&A. Let's go back. I don't know if I saw any questions come through. This is going to be a really short show tonight, guys. How can I help you? Seriously. Even, you know what? If you have questions about the comments that I made about cameras and where we see cameras going, software, any of that kind of stuff, let me know. Oh, I will tell you. See, I got ahead of myself. the comment that I made about the buff light. Let me pull that back up here again and see if I can find it. Or did I close that? Nope, I didn't. Here's one of the other reasons why I'm not a fan of this particular light, and that is because the gels. One of the ways that these companies are really getting us, the consumer, is by creating dedicated tools like this, right? So, the problem you run into is this, like, these filter domes only fit the buff lights, right? And then you've got, the Magma domes, and you've got, Westcott coming out with domes, and all these different companies coming out with domes. It's like, great. So then if you switch brands at some point, you're having to replace everything, right? So I will tell you that I would really discourage you, especially for a studio shooter. I would discourage you from going with those kind of snap-on domes. While indeed it's kind of quick and easy, ultimately being able to put a colored gel over a 7-inch reflector, or just looping it over, your flash tube in general, as long as you don't let it touch the flash tube, it's going to be much more effective because you can use those gels in so many different ways. So the convenience is very tempting, yes, but when we look at the price and we look at the fact that they are not interchangeable from one brand to the next, I for my method of thinking and working, I can't justify the costs behind those at all. I'm all for, spending good money on gear that will save me time, because I value time right alongside of quality, right? But if it's going to save me a little bit of time, not improve my quality, and then ultimately cost me extra money down the road if I make a change, yeah, then that's not an option for me. So from Anya, we got a question here. This is a good one. What are your methods to encourage your creativity? Anya, some folks that are here have probably heard me say this before. My favorite answer to that question is drugs. But I swear I've never done drugs. Honest, I do not do drugs. I'm one of those people. I'm scared to death of that stuff. In terms of encouraging creativity, it's interesting that you use the word encourage. So the way that I would approach it, or the way that I would answer that, is I would like to use a different word. I think if we and I have a feeling, possibly that English is not your native language, so it's okay. But I want to be clear in the answer. I believe if we have to encourage creativity, I'm more concerned with what is the lack of motivation. Why do we not feel like we're trying, and why it's not happening? If we need to help our creativity, if we need to improve our ability to be creative, that's a different story. So I'm going to frame my answer a little bit more along the lines of ways to improve creativity, ways to help it kind of move it along. So there are really a lot of things that you can do. But before I tell you any of them, let me explain what I feel is the most important piece of how do you improve your creativity, and that is by making creativity a habit. If you don't make it a habit, it is going to be very, very hard to improve your creative abilities. And think about what I just said, making it a habit to be able to improve something. That's why athletes train, right? That's why musicians practice. Anything we do, gymnasts, dancers, you name it, if you're going to get better at it, what do you have to do? You have to do it over and over and over and over again. It's got to become a habit. So that's why I kind of paused on the word encourage, because to me, that's feeling like, okay, well, if I've got to encourage somebody, then actually maybe I shouldn't be encouraging them. Maybe they're just really not that interested, right? But if we're looking to improve, step one, make it a habit. Now, that sounds really easy, but that still doesn't really help you, does it? Start with the easy things, right? What I would do is I would give you 2 phrases that you can Google at your convenience. The first phrase is divergent thinking. In fact, here I will type it in the chat. And then the second one is convergent. Okay, cool. So divergent thinking, let's talk about that one primarily, is really just the concept of teaching yourself to be able to take random objects and create something with them. So I'm sitting here in my office, and whoops, and I hit the wrong button. There we go. I'm sitting here in my office, and I've got a bunch of stuff around me, but actually here. So right out of frame, there is a tissue box, right? So if I had a camera here, I could take this tissue and I could poke a hole in it. And then I could, here, let's see if we can do it with this. I could stretch it over the lens, and here, I'm gonna have to switch. I don't know if this will work here, but I could stretch over the lens, and I could start to create kind of like a vignette type filter, and we stretch it bigger, and we can play around and we can experiment with it. I could take the tissue and I could use it as a diffuser on a flash, right? So it's basically connecting dots. It's putting things together. That's what divergent thinking is. Convergent thinking is the way you challenge it, meaning, okay, so I've got this idea to put two things together. What else could I do with those two things? What other things might happen? Many of us, our creativity, it kind of comes in an organic way. In other words, an idea pops into our head. Oh, that's cool. Let's do that. Or we see something and that kind of makes us feel creative because we feel like that's beautiful. We should photograph it. And that's great. But what we don't do is we don't take a lot of time to consider the options. We take the picture that we see and we kind of move on, right? So divergent and convergent thinking are really kind of the science behind working through ideas. Now, let's take it a step further. What else do you do? So I'll tell you, since I do creative portraiture and I work with models and I do fashion work, and I also do a lot of abstract photography, one of the things that I do is I steal. Literally, I'm proud of that. I steal ideas. But let me explain, right? So I literally have thousands of images on my phone and on folders on my computer. I may see an image on Pinterest, and it's a color combination that I would have never thought to put together. I was like, I want to try that color combination sometime. I might see a creative portrait with a hairstyle that's got a really interesting way of doing a high ponytail on the top of the model's head. And I've never done anything like that. And I think that would be really cool. But here's the thing with all these ideas. I'm not saving these pictures so I can go out and do that picture. No, absolutely not. Remember the old adage, if you've ever used a copying machine, right? Copy is never good as the original, okay? Because it's not. So the goal is not to copy what I've found. The goal is to steal a piece of it and then make it my own. Now, if you're new to photography, by all means, copy something for the sake of proving to yourself that you are able to do it, to kind of figure it out. Go for it. But set some standards for yourself. When you get to the point where you kind of feel like, okay, I've accomplished it. I've copied that image. Don't go to Facebook or Instagram and be posting it like, oh, look what I did. Because the reality of it is it's not going to be as good as the original one. Plus, in all honesty, you basically stole what somebody else did, completely stole it, straight up, used it. You ought to go pay them, right? Once you get to the point where you've accomplished the copy for the sake of learning, then you have to go one step further. The one step further is, how do I make it my own? What do I do that then defines this concept as mine, right? That's the creativity piece. Part of the way that I maintain the habit of looking for ideas and keeping my mind sharp for ideas, I have two dogs that are very frustrated because they're in the room with me tonight, which they're usually not. and there's a window they like to look out, but my wife's not home. She's in an event at school, and so the window's closed, and they're just not happy at all. But twice a day, I walk both of these dogs for a mile each walk, okay? It is the same walk, the same path that I have been doing now with them for 10 years. They are very excited to go out and traverse the exact same route and catalog all the smells to see what's changed. I, of course, am bored to tears with the path. So I use that time as my photography time, my creative time. Now, my goal is not to take pictures, but I do go through my neighborhood looking at details. This especially helps me with my abstract work. I'm looking at colors. I'm looking at textures. Different times of day, I'm looking at how the shadows are falling in the neighborhood. I'm looking at shapes. And in my mind, I'm basically making interesting pictures with what's there. On a rare occasion, I will pull out my phone and take a picture. Not that often because they have a task to do. They want to catalog the neighborhood. They don't want to wait for me to take pictures. On an even rarer occasion, I'll finish the walk and grab a real camera and go back out and shoot something. But overwhelmingly, it's just an exercise. It's an exercise to keep the habit going. So to build creativity and to get good at creativity and to improve your ability to be creative, build a habit. While you're doing that, one of my favorite phrases in the whole world, don't be afraid to suck. The way other people would say it is embrace failure. Intentionally make mistakes, to explore, to try things. That's not giving you permission to do horrible work. It's giving you permission to try something that doesn't work and then figure out how to improve it, figure out what it's going to take to make it interesting, right? The most creative people in the world learn very early on that the more they embrace failure, the more creative they can become and the faster they can get there. What we know is safe because we know it. What we don't know is where the exciting stuff is. But that requires risk, taking chances, and hence failure. Okay? So I hope that helps. Believe me, creativity is something that I could talk about for the next several hours. I teach a couple classes on creativity. I'm actually, my wife, college professor, is actually this semester teaching a course on creativity. And because of other commitments she has at this school, I'm actually going to be teaching part of that course for her with college students. So yes, they're actually crazy enough to leave me alone with college students. But yeah, it's a lot of fun. It's a subject that I'm very, very passionate about. And I actually have some very strong feelings about, because while there's a tremendous amount of science and research that's been done on it, a lot of it doesn't really apply to photographers. And so if you just take it at kind of face value for what scientists have learned about creativity, it can actually be a little bit misleading and defeating for photographers. So that's why I like to really kind of break it down and give people, number one, what we do know from science. It's very usable, but also kind of share the way that I do it, because I do think there is sometimes, if you look at the work, if you look at the work of like Lindsay Adler or Joe McNally or these people, you look at the work and you're like, oh my God, they're so amazingly talented. They're so amazingly creative. They're just amazing. And they are. They absolutely are. But at the same time, part of the reason they're so amazing is that creativity is a habit for them. Creativity is an awareness. It's a mindset that never shuts off. And that's something you have to work at. It's like being an athlete. Okay. All right. So let's see. Beverly had a question there. What lens to use, and what was the sweet spot, if that makes sense? And and the photo with the red background, Beverly. So that was a Tamron. 70 to 180. That's my go-to portrait lens. I do pretty much all of my portrait work with that lens at this point. The brief history when I switched over to Sony, I'm not a fan of the prices of Sony lenses, nor am I a fan of the size or the weight. It's ridiculous. Nor I am a fan of, for that money, you only get a 1-year warranty. So Tamron, which is partly owned by Sony, 12%, I believe, owned by Sony. Tamron, who also owns the patents to the lens coatings that go in the front of the Sony lenses and Tamron lenses and others. Tamron makes these amazingly good lenses that have a 6-year warranty, right? So, yeah, the Tamron 70 to 180, it's a 2.8 lens. As far as the sweet spot, there's two things that you could be referring to, so I'll answer both of them. In terms of focal length, I mentioned lately, I've been shooting anywhere from, 100, 105 to like 135 in that ballpark. That particular shot with the red, it was shot at 121 millimeter. And no, I didn't like look at the lens and say, "Oh, I want 121 millimeter today." I knew approximately the distance that I wanted to work at, and I knew approximately that I wanted to be in the 100 plus range, but I definitely didn't want to be all the way out at like 180 because that would have put me pretty far away from my subject, right? The other sweet spot is aperture. So there are different ways to look at it. If you're shooting on location, you are going to select your aperture much different than if you were shooting in a studio. So in that particular shot in the studio, there's no foreground and there's no background. So depth of field doesn't have as much impact on the shot. The most important aspect of depth of field in that picture is, do I want the tip of her nose in focus, and do I want her ears in focus, and do I want her shoulders in focus? If I want all of that in focus, then I need to work at an aperture that is going to accomplish that for me. So factoring in that I'm working with a short telephoto lens at 121 millimeters, short to medium length, that's considered, okay, at 121. F8 is the sweet spot that is going to give me enough depth of field that if I focus on my subject's eyes, because I have eye tracking autofocus turned on in the camera, that I will have the tip of her nose in focus and I will have the ears and shoulders in focus, okay? If I was shooting outdoors on location, then I might be more inclined to go with a wider aperture like at f2.8 or 4, but then I also have to realize that if I'm doing a close-up like that red portrait that I showed you, I will be able to get her ears in focus, be able to get the tip of her nose pretty in focus, not tack sharp, and we'll have soft shoulders, soft backs of the ears, right? And that's not necessarily a bad thing. It's just important to be aware of that, because if I'm outside and I'm shooting at 2.8 at 121 millimeter, shooting as close as I did, if I turn her face like this and the camera locks on the front eye, the eyelashes of the back eye will be soft, blurry. That becomes problematic, right? So from an aperture standpoint, in the studio, for me, f8 is my go-to. And by the way, just to help you out a little bit more, Beverly, when I go into the studio, I determine my aperture before I ever turn my lights on. Okay, because in the studio, when you're a portrait photographer working in a studio or working with models, whatever, even product work, in the studio, you're God. You decide where the light's going to be, how high it's going to be, how soft it's going to be, what modifier. All those things, you decide. Obviously, outside in natural light, we can try to modify the outdoor light and we can maybe supplement it with some light, but we can't tell Mother Nature, hey, listen, I need you to move over there like now. I don't have time to come back in 3 hours, right? We don't have that option. So in the studio, we have total control. So the thought process in the studio is determine the aperture that you want to shoot at based on what you're trying to do, and then you build the light to match that, right? So I set my camera at f8, and then I adjust the power of the light until the exposure is correct, right? So that's how I'm building that out. Outdoors, it would be not completely opposite. I would still do the same thing in terms of what aperture do I want to shoot at. That's the first thing I select. If I'm photographing a person, aperture is the first setting I'm interested in for a person. not a sports picture, but a portrait or a modeling picture. Aperture is the first thing. And by the way, that does not mean I'm advocating for aperture priority. I think aperture priority is a horrible idea. If you're a mirrorless camera shooter, there's no reason to ever shoot aperture or shutter priority again, ever. Those were very valuable settings for DSLRs. They make no sense with modern mirrorless cameras. No sense whatsoever. So if I'm working outdoors, I am going to select my aperture for the depth of field that I want. I'll select my shutter speed based on if it's a longer lens. I want to make sure that I'm stabilizing it. Is my subject going to be moving? I need to be able to stop whatever action. And then I use the ISO to adjust the brightness. So the way that I think about it, here's a quote, if you will, that you can kind of all use to think this through. Select your aperture with emotion, your shutter speed with purpose, and use your ISO to make your image lighter or darker. So forget this triangle crap. There is no exposure triangle. It just doesn't exist. There's no such thing. All it is a memorization technique. It was a suggestion somebody made in a book in 1995 that then got turned into a chart on the internet. And it became a big thing in the digital era where it was already useless, because ISO with digital cameras is not the same as ISO with film cameras. So don't get all hung up on this exposure triangle thing, because it's useless. There are 3 settings. You need to understand what those 3 settings are: aperture, shutter speed, ISO. And you need to know what they do, right? That's it. That's all you need to know. You don't need a triangle. So how do you prioritize what you do with them? Aperture has the greatest impact on emotion. How much of that shot's in focus? Am I going to have bokeh in the background, or is it going to be tack sharp, right? Those are things that when we look at those elements in a picture, have an emotional impact. Shutter speed is purposeful. Shutter speed makes sure that you don't get camera motion because you're working at too slow a shutter speed and you jerk the camera. Shutter speed makes sure that if you've got a subject that's moving really fast, it's not going to be blurry. So shutter speed is purpose-driven. If you're using a flash, you want to work at the fastest possible shutter speed, unless you want shutter drag. So again, purpose-driven. Aperture with emotion, shutter speed with purpose, and then the ISO, all it's doing is making your picture lighter or darker. And some of you are still hanging on to the idea that I can't raise my ISO, I have to shoot at the base ISO. In fact, heck, you can go back in my videos 5 years. I used to tell people, always try to shoot at your base ISO. Because 5 years ago, that was an issue with cameras. Mirrorless cameras were not the dominant camera on the market. DSLRs were. And the ISO capabilities of cameras were nowhere near where they are today. So, yes, is base ISO the highest quality, most noise-free that your camera is capable of generating? Kind of, providing you've exposed it properly. And I don't mean by a histogram. I just mean providing that you've exposed it properly. Yes, it is. But does that mean if you raise your ISO a stop, 2 stops, 3 stops, 4 stops, that your picture's going to look like crap? Absolutely not. In fact, you could raise 6, 7 stops with many cameras and still get a very workable file that, with a little hit of noise reduction from a program like Topaz AI, or even for that matter, Adobe's new denoise AI, incredible, absolutely incredible technology, right? So it's time to start changing the way we think about those things. And it's time to, from an educator standpoint, it's time to start changing how we teach those things. The exposure triangle is useless. Anybody can try to prove to me otherwise, and I'll disassemble the argument, because it just does not apply to mirrorless digital cameras. Understand that a memorization technique, because people will argue, yeah, but it's a great way for me to remember it. You need a triangle to remember those 3 things, really? Because the triangle has no function. The triangle has absolutely no function, right? So you can remember the 3 things without a triangle. It's just that simple, right? That has no relation to what the actual relationship is between them. So, all right, gang. It is 7 o'clock. I'm actually going to try and end this on time tonight because, heck, I never end on time. All right. So, we're done. I hope you found some value in what we shared tonight. If you still haven't done so, please thumbs up. Helps people find out about the show. And look, remember, you don't get back the days that you waste. So please go pick up that camera and shoot something because your best shot, it's your next shot. Adios, gang. Do the work.